On the morning of June 4th, 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy had not lost a single fleet carrier in 6 months of war. By that afternoon, it had lost 4. Not to a bigger fleet, not to a secret weapon. Japan lost them because of a plan they wrote themselves, and because a group of exhausted men in a windowless basement in Hawaii had been quietly reading Japan's mail for months. 6 months earlier, Japan had crippled the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. This is the battle where that came back to collect. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had a problem, and it was the same problem he'd had since December. Pearl Harbor had sunk battleships. It had not sunk carriers. The American carriers had been out at sea that morning, and by mid-1942, they were the only thing that mattered. Yamamoto needed to finish the job while Japan still had the advantage. His solution was Midway Atoll, 2 specks of sand about 1,100 miles northwest of Hawaii, with a runway on them. The logic was simple: attack Midway, and the Americans would have to send their carriers to defend it. Japan would be waiting. One decisive battle, war over. The logic was simple. The plan was not. Yamamoto's operation was split across thousands of miles of ocean, with forces divided into groups that couldn't support each other. His own battleships, including the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, were positioned hundreds of miles behind the carriers, where they contributed roughly as much to the battle as they would have from Tokyo. And the whole thing rested on one assumption: that the Americans would show up late, surprised, and confused. They showed up early. They knew exactly what was coming, and they had picked their spot. Act 1. The Codebreakers. In a basement at Pearl Harbor, a unit called Station HYPO had been chewing on the Japanese naval code, JN-25, for months. It was led by Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort, an officer who famously worked in a smoking jacket and slippers, occasionally went days without leaving the building, and had a habit of being right when his superiors were not. By spring 1942, Rochefort's team could read fragments of Japanese messages within hours of interception, and those fragments kept mentioning a coming operation against a target called AF. Rochefort was convinced AF was Midway. Naval intelligence back in Washington disagreed. They thought the Japanese were headed somewhere else entirely. Nimitz had to bet the Pacific Fleet on one of these 2 answers. So HYPO ran a test. They sent a message to Midway by undersea cable, a cable the Japanese could not tap, instructing the base to broadcast an uncoded radio message saying its fresh water plant had broken down. Midway broadcast it. Japan intercepted it. And within a day, HYPO picked up an encrypted Japanese message, helpfully reporting that AF was short on fresh water. The entire course of the Pacific War pivoted on the world's most consequential plumbing complaint. Act 2, 3 days. Now Nimitz knew the target, the approximate date, and roughly what was coming. What he did not have was ships. His battleships were gone. Halsey, his most aggressive carrier commander, was in a hospital bed with a severe skin condition and out of the battle. That left Enterprise and Hornet and Yorktown, which had been badly damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea a month earlier and was trailing an oil slick 10 miles long. Yard inspectors looked at Yorktown and estimated the repairs would take 3 months. Nimitz gave them 3 days. Roughly 1,400 workers swarmed the ship around the clock in dry dock number 1. They patched the flight deck, welded steel plates over the hull where they should have been riveted, and simply skipped the internal repairs there wasn't time for. Some of her boilers were never fixed at all, which meant she'd fight the battle slower than she should have. Less than 72 hours after entering dry dock, Yorktown steamed out of Pearl Harbor, with welders reportedly still working on board. The Japanese did not know she was coming. As far as they knew, Yorktown had been sunk at Coral Sea. They were about to run into a ghost. Act 3. Nagumo's Impossible Morning. June 4th. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commanding the 4-carrier striking force, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, launched his first strike against Midway at dawn. The strike hit the island hard, but not hard enough. The flight leader radioed back that a second attack would be necessary. So Nagumo ordered his reserve aircraft, the ones armed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, held back in case American ships appeared, to be rearmed with land attack bombs instead. Then, mid-rearm, a scout plane reported American ships. Then worse, it reported that one of them appeared to be a carrier. Nagumo now had a genuinely miserable set of choices. His reserve planes were half rearmed with the wrong weapons. His first strike was returning from Midway low, on fuel and needed to land. His flight decks were tied up. An American aircraft from Midway kept attacking, forcing his ships into evasive maneuvers. He chose to recover his aircraft, rearm everything properly for an attack on ships, and then launch one massive coordinated strike. It was, on paper, the professional decision. It also meant that for the next hour, the most powerful carrier force on Earth was busy doing housekeeping instead of fighting. Act 4. The squadrons that didn't come back. Then the American carrier planes arrived. And the first thing that happened was a massacre. 3 squadrons of TBD Devastator torpedo bombers attacked first. The Devastator was slow, lightly armed, and by 1942 thoroughly obsolete. They attacked at low altitude, without fighter escort, against the finest fighter aircraft in the Pacific. Torpedo Squadron 8 from Hornet, led by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron, found the Japanese fleet and attacked alone. All 15 aircraft were shot down. Of the 30 men who flew that attack, 1 survived. Ensign George Gay, who spent the rest of the battle floating in the Pacific under a seat cushion, watching the most decisive naval battle of the 20th century happen directly above him. Of the roughly 41 Devastators that attacked that morning, 6 made it back. Not one torpedo hit anything. But they did something else. They dragged the Japanese fighter cover down to sea level, where it stayed, chasing torpedo bombers across the water while the sky above the carriers emptied out. Act 5, 10:22. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey was flying Enterprise's dive bombers toward where the Japanese fleet was supposed to be. It wasn't there. Nagumo had changed course. McCluskey was now low on fuel with a decision to make: turn back and save his aircraft, or keep searching and risk losing all of them to empty tanks. He kept searching. And then he spotted a single Japanese destroyer, the Arashi, running at full speed across the ocean below him, hurrying to rejoin the fleet after chasing off an American submarine. McCluskey reasoned that a lone destroyer moving that fast was heading towards something, not away from it. He followed it. The Arashi led him straight to the carriers. Nimitz would later say that McCluskey's decision decided the fate of the battle. At 10:22 in the morning, American dive bombers rolled in out of the sun onto carriers with no fighter protection overhead, Decks cluttered with aircraft, fuel lines running, and, critically, stacks of removed ordnance sitting in the hangars instead of safely back in the magazines. Because there simply hadn't been time. In roughly 6 minutes, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were burning wrecks. Hiryu, further off, survived and launched a counterattack that found Yorktown and crippled her. It was the last thing Hiryu ever did. American dive bombers found her that same afternoon and finished the job. Yorktown stayed afloat until June 7th, when a Japanese submarine put torpedoes into her and the destroyer Hammond alongside. Act 6. What it actually cost. The numbers. Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, the heavy cruiser Makuma, roughly 250 aircraft, and about 3,000 men. America lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, about 145 aircraft, and 307 men. Now, one myth worth killing, because you've probably heard it. For decades, the story was that Nagumo's decks were packed with fully armed planes just 5 minutes from launching when the bombs hit. It's dramatic. It's in the movies. It's also not true. That version came from a post-war account by a Japanese officer named Mitsuo Fuchida, and Japanese records show the strike aircraft were still in the hangars. Nagumo was never 5 minutes from anything. The second myth is that Midway wiped out Japan's naval aviators. It didn't. Japan lost around 110 aircrew there. What Japan actually lost was irreplaceable. 4 carriers and the thousands of trained mechanics, armorers, and hangar crews who went down with them. America could build carriers faster than Japan could ever replace them. After June 4th, 1942, that arithmetic decided the war. Japan built a plan to force one decisive battle. They got exactly what they asked for. 6 months earlier at Pearl Harbor, Japan had gambled that one devastating strike could end a war before it started. At Midway, they made the same bet twice, and this time it cost them everything. If you want to see how that first gamble went wrong, the Pearl Harbor story is on our channel. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.